Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm Vince Holland, one of the directors at large with the African American Alumni Association here at Case Western Reserve. And it's my pleasure and honor to welcome you this evening. The African American Alumni Association of Case Western Reserve was officially started in October of 2009. Our purpose is to provide support and network opportunities to African Americans, alumni, and work to provide forums for the university to recruit students and foster friendships and connections with Case Western Reserve. Forgive me, my cat's also listening. I hope that you and your loved ones are healthy. But before we begin today, I'd like to give you a few quick housekeeping notes. Everybody's on mute by default. Please remain on mute to limit background noise during the program. If you should have any questions, please utilize the chat feature, and we will do our best to get them answered during the program. So that we know who you are, we welcome you to rename yourself by clicking on participants, finding your name, then using the more options and select rename. Finally, please turn on your video if you can. We would like to see your smiling, handsome, beautiful, and wonderful faces. I'm also happy to welcome you to our second Profiles of Inclusive Excellence, a virtual series in collaboration with the African American Alumni Association, Office of Inclusion, Diversity, and Equal Opportunity, and African American Studies to highlight work and research of our African American and Black faculty on this campus. Again, thank you for being part of this evening. We appreciate you. Before I turn things over to our host for the evening, let me share some information with you about tonight's featured guest, Dr. Blanton Tolbert. Blanton Tolbert is a native of South Carolina, where he completed his bachelor's degree in chemistry at the University of South Carolina. He also has been involved in many programs, and after graduating from the University of South Carolina, Blanton matriculated to the Department of Chemistry at Hampton University, the Pirates, as part of a cooperative degree program with several other universities. He's earned a doctorate of philosophy in biophysics and structural biology from the University of Rochester. He was awarded the George V. Metzger Outstanding Dissertation Award for his research accomplishments in graduate school. And he's extended his training as a Howard Hughes Medical Institution postdoctoral fellow at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He relocated to Case Western Reserve, where he received tenure in a tenure-track position. He's been promoted to associate professor with tenure in 2015 and full professor in 2019. Congratulations. Dr. Tolbert currently holds a secondary appointment with the Department of Pharmacology at Case Western Reserve. He's also a member of the Case Western Reserve Center for AIDS Research. He's also conducted research with an emphasis on high-resolution structures for biomolecules involving the replication cycle of RNA and related viruses, and he's been supported by numerous grants and peer-reviewed articles. He is a permanent member of the NIH HIV Molecular Virology Cell Biology Drug Department Study Section. I think I got that all out. And in 2021, we'll share that. It also gives me great pleasure to introduce our host for the evening, Dr. Heather Burton, who's the Senior Director for the Faculty and Institution of Diversity with Case Western Reserve University, specializing in gender and racial equality. Dr. Burton works to encourage individuals and systemic change with our college and our neighborhood. In closing, I would like to thank you for joining us, and I'd also like to welcome a person who's been a Hampton University Pirate, a University of Rochester Yellow Jacket, a Miami University Red Hawk, and now a Case Western Reserve University Spartan. Thank you. And let me turn it over to Dr. Heather Burton.
Thank you, Vincent. Thank you very much. I appreciate the introduction, and I want to welcome everyone to our Profiles of Excellence, of Profiles of Inclusive Excellence. This is an opportunity that the Office of Inclusion and Diversity, along with the African American Studies minor and the African American Alumni Association, have partnered to highlight some of our faculty on campus throughout the academic year. And so every month, beginning in October, we started with the provost. This month, we have Dr. Tolbert, and then we will come back in January with Dr. Adrian Fletcher and move forward from there. But tonight we are excited because we have Dr. Blanton Tolbert with us on this evening. And as we begin, Dr. Tolbert, one of the things that I started with our first Profile of Inclusive Excellence was my famous question. And the question goes along with the movie Brown Sugar. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brown Sugar, but when Taye Diggs and Sanaa Lathan starred in this movie, they had a question that they asked throughout the movie. And the movie was about hip hop. But the question was, when did you fall in love with hip hop? And so as I continue in that pattern, the pattern is, Dr. Tolbert, when did you fall in love with chemistry?
Well, first of all, I would like to just thank the African American Alumni Association and also Audio for partnering to put together this series. And I would also like to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join this Zoom. This is truly an honor and a pleasure for me to see all of your faces. And many of you, this is my first time having the opportunity to see you, and others, it's good to see that you're still doing healthy and safe, and that you're safe. But to answer your question, Dr. Burton, I fell in love with hip hop as a young man growing up in South Carolina, and I'm still very much into hip hop. But no, seriously, my passion for chemistry really dates back to, I would say, my childhood days. I mean, I was always interested in nature. I was a big outdoors type of kid. I spent a lot of time in the woods. I grew up in the South. And so I was very curious about nature and how things work in nature. And so I can trace back those, those sort of early childhood experiences that ultimately sort of put me along the path that I'm on now. So yeah.
Was there any, or is there any childhood experience that stands out that you can really reflect on to make you think about just how you were taken into your like for chemistry?
Yeah. So my early, and my very first and still today significant role model in my life is my older brother. He's about 7 years older than me. He was a biology major, graduated from Hampton, went on to Meharry to get his medical degree, and of course now he is a very successful physician. And so I think, having that personal role model in my family, someone who I could look up to and aspire to be like, was very important in shaping those early passions. But more so, I think the significant aspect of that was giving me sort of the realization that I could achieve those goals, right? As you know, you probably don't meet many Black American chemists growing up or even today. And so just having that personal familial connection was very important.
Mm-hmm. So one question I do want to ask you, Dr. Tolbert, is your childhood. You just mentioned that you grew up in the South. So what has that transition been like from, we can even talk about, because one of the biggest transition is that we're expecting a snowstorm, of 12 inches? So growing up in the South and then making that transition, what has that been like for you?
Well, so the transition was not abrupt. It was somewhat gradual. I spent about 6 years of my young adult life at the University of Rochester, where I earned my PhD. And I would say the climate and the weather pattern in Rochester is very similar to the weather patterns in Cleveland. So, I was primed, if you will, for the weather that we have here. Culturally, there are some similarities and there are some notable differences. Again, I would attribute sort of my time in Rochester as getting me acclimated to the culture in the Northeast. I grew up in a very small town in South Carolina, and only recently I think we got a Starbucks and like a Pier 1. So it gives you some idea of the size of the community that I'm from and I grew up in.
Yeah, I think, now what community in South Carolina did you grow up in?
It's called Greenwood, South Carolina. One of the things I'll say about Greenwood, we're kind of famous for, if you remember President Obama's campaign rally during his first campaign term, Fired Up, Ready to Go. A county councilwoman from my hometown, Edith Childs, is actually the person who sort of started chanting, "Fired Up, Ready to Go," and that became one of Obama's big campaign rallies. I graduated high school with one of her sons, and Edith Childs was in many ways almost like an extended part of my family growing up.
Okay. See, that's why I wanted to ask of what part of South Carolina. My family is from South Carolina. My mom is from Seneca, and then I have family in Charleston. So just kind of thinking about those South Carolina connections. The only thing I can remember is red dirt and the old stone white church that she always takes me to, where everybody buried out back. So I don't,
A lot of that.
That's a whole nother thing. But switching gears, Dr. Tolbert, I want to talk a little bit about your research. Vincent introduced some of your research as it's around HIV/AIDS. What is the most fascinating thing about what you do in your research?
So, I will, I'm going to answer that in a slightly different way. I would say that the best part of my job, right, the thing that I'm most proud of is being able to run a research lab where I have the opportunity to work with and train individuals who are really from all over the world. Okay. And that's really the true passion. It's being able to help groom them to become scientists. Okay. And it's one of the most exciting, uplifting aspects of the career. And in fact, it's really the reason that I decided that this is kind of what I want to do in terms of pursuing this, at least at an academic level, professionally. I had many good mentors in my own process, and I understand the importance of creating and fostering that environment. As it relates to the science, as Vincent mentioned, my lab is very much a lab that studies the biochemistry of RNA and retroviruses. So I started my work on HIV. We're still very much actively involved on trying to understand some of the basic mechanisms of how that virus replicates in cells. But we were also recently able to pivot to start working on COVID. And so we have some projects as it relates to Sars Cov2, which is the virus that causes COVID-19. And so for me, it's just exciting. I mean, it's exciting being able to be actively involved in this race to understand viruses in the process of perhaps having a breakthrough and developing a new antiretroviral or an antiviral. There's a lot of personal and professional satisfaction involved in that process.
So I have a question. Of course, I have a whole bunch of questions, but in that, you use two terms. And so for us lay people that are not chemistry majors, biology majors, unfamiliar with science, let's talk about a little bit more about RNA and biochemistry. Help the average person to understand, what does that even mean?
Well, biochemistry in itself, right, is a field of science. Okay, so in a simple explanation of what is biochemistry, I would say it's the science of studying the molecules of life, if you will. Okay, and those molecules come in 4 to 5 major categories of flavors. There's DNA, that we all are very familiar with, which is deoxyribonucleic acid. There's RNA, which is kind of like a sibling, if you will, of DNA, and that's ribonucleic acids. Then there are proteins. Most of us know about proteins from our diets, and of course, carbohydrates and lipids. So those are the major biological molecules that a biochemist like me studies. I'm particularly interested in RNA and proteins. And so why am I interested in RNA? Well, RNA is a very important molecule in our cells. We've learned recently that the majority of our own genomes encodes for RNA molecules, and those RNA molecules are important for normal, healthy cellular functions. Viruses store their genetic material, not all of them, but many of them store their genetic material in the form of RNA. And so by studying that molecule, we're able to better understand how viruses work. And if we understand how they work, then we have an opportunity then to develop strategies to inhibit them.
Okay. I want to back up because I have a question from the chat that can you repeat how it relates to HIV? I think something you said earlier, but I'm not sure. It says COVID relates to HIV, and I don't know if you made the statement that COVID relates to HIV or how it relates to HIV.
So the relationship of COVID and HIV would just be grouping these two. They're both, well, COVID is the disease, right? It's the manifestation of the viral infection. The actual virus that causes COVID is called SARS-CoV2. It's a family of coronaviruses. The relationship between SARS-CoV2 and HIV are that they're both viruses, and both of them store their genetic material in the form of RNA. And that I would say is the extent of the similarities, okay? At that point, they're very divergent, okay? But they do belong to this big, broad family of viruses that store their genetic material in the form of RNA.
I see the person who asked in the chat saying, okay, I think you've answered the question. You've answered the question thoroughly for them. What is, in the research that you've conducted, what has been something that has been like one of your big accomplishments as it relates to research?
Yeah, so 2020 has been a rough year, right? As we know, with everything that's going on in the world. But, surprisingly, 2020 has been probably one of my best professional years. We've had a lot of first major accomplishments in this year. We had a major paper accepted to the journal Nature Communications, which is a high impact journal. I can tell you, I've been knocking on that glass ceiling for years, and I finally was able to crack it this year at the beginning of the year. And in fact, the paper that we have now in that journal was the identification of a drug molecule that can slow the progression of enterovirus 71. EV71 is an RNA virus, and it causes hand, foot, and mouth disease. If you have a healthy, robust immune system, you normally can fight that virus off without any problems. But if you're immunocompromised and for reasons that we don't fully understand, and for some children in parts of Southeast Asia, it manifests with high morbidity rates. There's no vaccine and there's no drugs. So we had a kind of a breakthrough paper at the beginning of the year where we identified a drug molecule that can inhibit enterovirus 71. My lab determined the three-dimensional structure of a part of that RNA virus in the drug molecule bound. And that actually kind of got us started on COVID-19. So we were very early on, I would say back in February, my group, a few people from my lab and my collaborators at Duke and Rutgers met for a group meeting at Duke University on February 16th. And there we laid out some plans to work on COVID-19. And since then, we have been working on that virus. We just had a major paper accepted to a journal where it was a part of an international collaboration with a group out of Germany, groups from Spain. It was about 5 different countries, and we were the only lab from the United States to be a part of that breakthrough paper. So I would say that has been You know, one of the highlights so far of my professional career, and it's unfortunate that it had to come in 2020, but there's a little bit of, you know, I think irony even associated with that.
Has COVID had an impact on your lab and what's being produced out of your lab?
For sure. Like as I mentioned, we really made a pivot early on and started thinking about COVID and you know, seeing at least what we can do. At the very least, right? You know, getting a drug molecule is the big prize. But I would say that there are a lot of other little successes along the way of getting to that point, and those successes are just gaining a better understanding of that virus. I mean, COVID is new, and you know, as we all are very familiar with by now, there are aspects of it that are alarming and somewhat scary. And so being able to provide some new knowledge to understand some of the fundamental aspects of that virus have been, you know, real excitement. And many people in the group, if not all of them, have now carved out a side project on COVID-19.
I want to take a question from the chat really quickly. How do you think African Americans overcome their skepticism regarding the COVID-19 and vaccines in general?
You know, that's a loaded question. I don't think there's one simple answer to that question. I think access to information, reliable, accurate, factual information is important. I think having people that you look at and there's an immediate familiarity, giving you that information helps. You know, but these are only a couple of things, right, that I think that can be done and that need to be done to generate a little more confidence in the Black community as it relates to vaccines, as it relates to trials, and as it relates to antivirals. Okay, so it's something that we all have to be a part of. Okay, not just the Black community, but society in general.
So along the lines of the Black community and just being a Black male, how do you think your work, or do you see your work, or what is the impact of your work on the progress of the Black community?
Well, I would hope that having opportunities like this, can make some inroads in that. What I tell people is that I understand the science. You know, I understand the science behind the virus. I understand the science behind the vaccine, and I would make myself available to help with answering some of the questions that people might have. And I think that, to me, that is a professional obligation. That's my responsibility, is to be able to give back that knowledge that I've had the opportunity to acquire over the years.
I do want to say that Dr. Muhammad said exciting and congratulations to your article. So I want to mention that because I know that you're probably not following the chat, but I do want to let you know that you got a congratulations from the chat.
I appreciate it. Thanks.
So we know that science is a white male dominated field and has been. So as a Black male, what are some of the challenges you face specifically in the academy as it relates to being a scientist?
Well, I think the biggest challenge, and this is probably not specific to science, but so let me put this kind of in context. I was asked to serve on kind of like a professional development panel maybe 2-3 months ago. And the question was, if I could go back and tell the graduate student version of myself, give that person some advice based off of what I learned now to help that person navigate the process better. And so I thought about that for a while. And so my answer was to just, don't even worry about imposter syndrome, okay? It is a product of an environment that is set up to, in many ways, in my own personal opinion, to create that belief that, you don't belong. And so I think one of my biggest challenges that I've experienced along the way is just learning how to navigate, that feeling and that set of experiences that ultimately, right, challenges you emotionally and could potentially derail you. And so that would be, I think that is probably not even, again, it could probably be generally applied to not just science, but it is particularly more challenging in science and in the academy.
Yeah, I've done quite a bit of work within the STEM fields, especially around diversity, race relations, gender equity, racial equity. And it is a challenging field. I've sat in meetings, I've sat in presentations where I've heard different comments, and especially as it relates to underrepresented minorities. And so I was curious as to, your experience, but you talk about imposter syndrome, and imposter syndrome is real, and it's real for underrepresented students, faculty, staff to experience very often. Is there an instance where you can think of where imposter syndrome really stood out to you, that you were dealing with that?
I've dealt with it, pretty much, Dr. Burton, from the moment I started my PhD program. My PhD is in biophysics and structural biology from the University of Rochester. I was the only person of color in my entering class. And, I wish I could say that that story improved along the way, but, as these things go, the higher you climb, often the more lonely you feel. And so I don't know if there's one particular example that stands out. I would say it's just been the process and different manifestations of that throughout that have been a challenge. And what now, sort of the advice that I would give students and that I've learned to provide myself is that, you have to take your successes, even as small as they might seem, they are nevertheless successes, and they provide a foundation for you to build on. It boosts your self-confidence. It validates your role and your purpose. And I think that's, for me, is the solution, is to, see what you are actually accomplishing.
Yeah. And we're taught very often not to highlight our successes, especially when it comes to self-promotion. And so I do like that advice. I have a question from the chat also. Do you think that your imposter syndrome symptom stemmed from an outside motivation rather than intrinsic, since you had a personal example of someone reaching great heights in his career?
Yeah, right. So, that's a great question, right? So, I not only that I had a personal role model, but I also had a family, a nuclear family that made education a priority, and it was the solution, right? for us to sort of make it. So I come from that context, right? And even coming from that context, even having a role model that is my brother, right? You know, you can't really get closer than that per se. You still, nevertheless, or I still nevertheless had those anxieties and those feelings. So I think it's a complicated thing where it's the individual and the environment. It's a dynamic, and you can't overstate the influence of the environment on that dynamic.
Another question is, what are your major motivations in your life other than the influence of your great brother?
You know, is to providing opportunities. You know, being in a role where you know, I didn't have a person that shares a similar cultural experience in a capacity like this. A scientist running a research lab funded by the National Institutes of Health, publishing papers in the top journals. That was not something that I had access to. So that's a big motivator. It's a source of an energy, and it helps motivate me.
So let's talk about your lab, the students in your lab versus the students in your classroom. What is the biggest difference between, or how I should say, so we know in the lab, you have hands-on experience or hands-on mentoring, hands-on working. How do you motivate your students in the classroom just as equally?
Well, you know, that's not an easy thing. You know, it is a bit challenging depending on the course, the size of the course, et cetera. But one of the things that I attempt to do, and you know, I think the level of success with that is variable, but one of the things I attempt to do is encourage my students, whether they're in my class or they work in my lab, is to think, is to really get them critically thinking and asking questions about whatever it is we're discussing, okay? I don't want them to, in the classroom setting, I don't want them to regurgitate or give me back the information that I'm sharing with them. My goal and my responsibility, in my opinion, as a professor, is to help them understand the process of synthesizing information and using that information to ask the next set of questions. So that's the approach that I attempt to take in the class. Again, it's with variable degrees of success, depending on the class, depending on the student. And it's also really the approach that I take in my own lab.
And I can speak that I know you're a great mentor. We worked in collaboration with summer programs in which students from programs that I work with have been placed in your lab. And so in that, has there been one student that you have mentored that now you see them today and the transition that they've made based on some of the work that they've done with you is you're just amazed? Is there one student that has been that standout student to you that just made that big transition from being a part of your lab? And they may have sent it in an email, they may have said it. I mean, I know a couple students that always reach back out to you from the summer program, like, Dr. Tolbert, I need help. I don't know how to apply to this program. Dr. Tolbert, can you tell me what to do? But in general, just, you know, some students that you can speak of.
Yeah, well, you know, I have, you know, it's, you know, I'm going to say it's the fortunate opportunity, right, to be able to have what I hope has been a positive influence, not just on one student, right? I don't want to single out one student, right? Because I think they're all, you know, in their own ways have a growth, a development, right? And so I don't want to put them on a scale. But I've had the opportunity to have an impact, I think, on multiple students. My second PhD student is now, looking for faculty positions, and that's going to be really, really exciting for me. Once he's able to find his tenure track faculty position, that will be, I think, as an academic. That's kind of what you hope happens, right? You at least have one or two of your PhD graduates sort of move on and develop their own labs and their own independent careers, and hopefully, use some of the things that you've taught them along the way. I will kind of share this as related. What's starting to happen now, and I'm again humbled, excited about it, is that I'm actually getting students to just interested in applying directly to my lab. I gave a talk at a Zoom seminar at the University of Maryland at the beginning of the year in September, and part of the Zoom seminar series, I met with faculty, and one of the faculty members I met with decided to invite his research group. And there's one young man who was in that meeting. His parents are from Trinidad and Tobago. He's first generation U.S. born. Reached out to me about 2 weeks ago and said that he was applying to the PhD program at Case and was wondering if I was accepting students because he wanted to apply to and join my lab. And I'll be honest with you. I had a Zoom interview with the kid, and that is kind of cool, right? To now realize that, wow, this is starting to sort of materialize in a real tangible way.
And I'll brag on you for a minute, because I know two students from our ASIC CERP and NOAA AGAP program who have been interested in the PhD program and directly contacted you. And I'm bragging on the one who Dr. Tolbert, I say with his mentorship, especially when we talk about lab experiences and the faculty that they're working with, that this particular student is now a PhD student at Case Western Reserve. And so, and she is a Black female, so I'm taking a little credit on that one. But but it takes the mentorship that's provided, I always say, from the faculty that I work with. And so if I have faculty that are not doing what's needed in that lab experience, they can make or break the students wanting to come and attend our institution. From the chat, there is a question or comment and a question that when I step into the classroom, I still hear small gasps that their mathematics professor is a Black American female. Do you experience the same or similar reactions from your students?
I certainly have experienced those, and in fact, I might still experience them, but these days I just ignore them. Again, I kind of look at this in my own personal, opinions about this, is that if you focus too much on that, that's an attempt to take away from what your priority, what your goal, what your mission is. And so it's not easy, right, to not feel that influence or not be impacted by it, but I think is necessary. My job is to be, I'm a professor, and we don't know everything. We do know a lot. And I know for sure one of the things that I do know is that I have the capability and the ability to be a continuous learner. And so I really no longer worry about those gasps when I enter a room. I no longer really worry about those gasps when I'm invited to give a talk. I certainly used to. I mean, doing this, even this type of public speaking, right? I mean, it makes you a little nervous inside. So you always have that stage fright, but it's a different type of stage fright. It's not what it used to be. I don't know if that question meant to be answered with a little bit of advice, but if there is some advice is, do what you can to sort of not allow that to be a drain on you emotionally.
Yeah, I like that advice, and that's key, is not letting certain things drain us emotionally, especially when we are in certain fields and you walk into classrooms. Like you said, you've experienced, but now it's gotten to the point where I think, and probably in your field, as long with the math teacher with Dr. Muhammad, is that you probably are one of only very many times. So being one of only, you learn to accept that there are going to be gasps very often when I walk into a space. And in that, I know you focus a little bit in that answer on now being confident in who you are, knowing that, and one thing we know is that you know your material, you know your research. I'm sure you tell your students when it's your research, you know it, and no one knows it like you do. So in that, when we think about Dr. Tolbert, and who is Dr. Tolbert? Like, who is Dr. Tolbert? What are 3 words that you would use to describe yourself?
Well, so first of all, I like to think that I'm a normal guy from South Carolina, right? Who was given a few opportunities and I took advantage of them. I made sure that I didn't waste them. 3 words to describe me, I would say, number 1, I'm creative. You have to be as a scientist. I'm in the business of scientific discovery, formulating hypotheses, and then going to test them. I would also say I'm determined. I'm very much motivated. I'm very goal oriented. I have many things that I want to accomplish. And then the last word I would say is resilient, and that kind of goes along with the journey, the process. You have to figure out mechanisms and strategies of getting through it and staying focused on your goals.
I was thinking of your words to describe yourself: creative, determined, and resilient. And it made me think that as a Black male, and thinking about that, as a Black male and that resilience, and backtracking to when you were a student, what was your experience, or did you have experiences in your own lab experiences where you dealt with microaggressions and bias throughout your own educational path?
Without question. There are enough examples where there are too many to pick one, right? Yes, to answer your question, I've most certainly dealt with it. I will share this one little story, if you will. I mean, I think it's appropriate. I was attending this conference, and the conference was in Big Sky, Montana. Okay. So you flew into Bozeman, then got on a 2-hour shuttle to go to Big Sky. It's a ski resort. So you get there, it's a biomolecular NMR conference. So that alone probably gives you an idea of who is attending that meeting, and I'm probably one of very, very, very few there, right? Person of color. So on the last night of this meeting, and this could be a microaggression or not, but this is something that sticks with me. It's something that I'll never forget. In fact, it motivates me. The last night of this meeting is a tradition to kind of have like a social hour, okay? And part of this social hour, some people dance. And there's a person in the field, in my field, that I looked up to. I mean, I read this person's manuscripts, papers as a graduate student. I understood them. I thought deeply about them. And so in many ways, this individual had become kind of like a scientific, if you will, role model for me. never met the individual before, but I knew of this person because I read all their work. So at this meeting, long story short, we were standing around talking, maybe about 3 or 4 of us, and this one individual was there. The other guy who was with us walked away and started dancing. And so I turned to this individual and I called his name and I said, "Hey, are you going out to dance?" And this person turned and looked at me and literally said, "I kid you not. I kid you not. I don't dance. I am not Black." So the magnitude of having that said to me in Big Sky, Montana, okay, 2 hours away from the airport, it's quite alarming. And so I would say that that's just one example of some of the things that I've had to experience along the way. And again, you know, they're not easy, right? They're not easy to deal with that. And there are not many people you can even share that with who will even, that you trust, and that's going to give you some good advice. So, but what I've learned to do over the years is to allow those things to motivate me to just go on and be more successful, if you will.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, I'm sure we all have stories of things that have been said to us that you just go, "Did they really just say that? Wow. Oh, okay." I always joke. A lot of my microaggressions comes in a body language, and a friend of mine said to me, "Maybe it's your hair that you always get," because someone always thinks that I'm a worker in a facility. I was at the doctor's office, and somebody said to me, "Are you transport?" I'm at a hotel at a conference and someone said, "Can you direct me where the pool is?" So, you know, and it's those little things that you say, wow, I'm still in a professional setting, but yet here is a microaggression that is put towards me, no matter what space I'm in. From the chat, I want to say, someone says, "Congratulations on your success. There are very few full professors of chemistry at a major institution who are native-born Black. Success in science is facilitated by developing a network of productive collaborators. What was your strategy for building your network of collaborators?"
You know, that is a very, very important observation, a point to make. You can't do this alone and expect to be accomplished or successful. I think so. How did I establish my network of collaborators? I mean, that happened in slightly different ways. Number one, I would say, is that I made fortuitously, okay, because I didn't know this going in, but I just made good decisions of choosing research mentors, okay? And I didn't know this when I was selecting the labs, right? But what I did was I had very specific reasons for why I wanted to work with a given individual that I work for. Number one for me, and this is what I tell my students all the time, is that you got to like the science first. You know, don't think you're going to like me, Dr. Tolbert, and that I'm going to be a great mentor for you, because I might be the worst mentor for you. We don't know that, right? A priori. But if you're passionate about the science, then that usually helps you to figure out how to navigate some of the other things along the way. So I really chose my mentors because I was interested in the science. And then I had secondary reasons why I chose them. Either they were at a certain place or they had a certain, experiences that I had not had personally. And that worked out for me. So there was an element of a strategy there. And so in doing that, my initial collaborators, right, have been collaborators that were really those mentoring relationships that I had for my PhD and my postdoc. Those mentoring relationships helped foster some of my early collaborations. okay? And that's really important. I think that's very important for a person of color, in fact, is that you need to have someone who is going to help you understand the field, the industry, help you get a foothold in an area that is in itself challenging to do, even if you're not a person of color, okay? So I think that is number one. Number two, once I started developing some credibility, right? Publishing some papers, getting some grants, then it just made people realize, oh yeah, this guy actually knows what he's doing, so let's give him a chance, right? So now, right, it's much easier for me to send an email if I read a paper or if I see someone at a meeting and sort of reach out to them and ask for that opportunity to see if we can work together.
I'm going to come back to collaboration because I have a question for you, but I do want to make it known to the listening audience that the article, the accomplishment that Dr. Tolbert spoke of for 2020, Vera has posted the link to an article in the chat. So if anyone is still interested in that, you can take a look in the chat and that article's there. In terms of collaboration, has there been anyone that you always wanted to work with or do research with, that you got to do research with? And then if not, who in the field stands out as someone, or is there someone that you would say, before I retire or before they retire, I would like to do some type of collaboration with them? Or are you just that great that everybody just needs to be collaborating with Dr. Tolbert?
No. The answer to the latter question is that's not the case at all. I mean, I think that I'm very passionate about what I work on, so it makes experiencing some elements of greatness easier. Okay, how about that? If I don't think there's one person in the field that I just really want to, work for before I say enough is enough. I will say that my own personal aspiration is to have a legacy, right? Where my science is respected. The contributions that we have made are being used, and I think that's it for me. If I could find that individual who has that perfect mix of what I want for myself, then maybe I want to learn a little more about that person and gain access to figure out, well, what makes them tick. But no, not really. There's not one person in particular right now that I think I really just have to collaborate with before I hang it all up.
Can you speak very briefly about the Tolbert Group? Is it independent or is it part of Case Western Reserve University?
Well, it's part of Case Western Reserve University, right? The research group operates out of the university. We use the university space. I fundraise. I support pretty much 90%, if not most of the people in my lab off of federal grants. The Tolbert Group is a collection of people who are learning, new science as it relates to the things I mentioned earlier that we work on. So it's not me, it's not the university, it's the group of people in the lab, and I just get the privilege of putting my name up there.
How do you choose your research? Like, how do you choose what you're going to study and work on?
Yeah, so I think that goes back to that creativity thing, right? I read a lot of papers. I review grants. I review papers, and so I'm looking at sort of new emerging topics, and even just some old topics in the field that I think personally were never adequately addressed, or you know not properly studied, and conclusions made that I don't agree with, and then I find gaps, knowledge gaps, and then I come up with a plan, an approach to fill those knowledge gaps. Generating new concepts, new innovations, etc.
I'm going to take this one last question from the chat, and then I have a final question before I turn it back over to Vincent to continue to close us out for the evening. But do you have people in your lab who have other backgrounds outside of chemistry, like math, statistics, biology, etc.?
Yeah, so the majority of the students in my lab now, I would say, have come through a traditional chemistry type pathway, but I don't have any requirements for that. I do have students who have biology backgrounds. I don't have a mathematician or a statistician as of yet. But I'll be honest with you, I kind of have an open door policy in the lab. Again, if you are passionate about the science, I believe in what we do. I believe in how we do it, that I can provide a culture, provide an environment to help a person reach their professional scientific goals.
Thank you, Dr. Tolbert. And to end us for this evening, one final question. We've talked about, your early childhood. We've talked about your research. We've talked about your mentoring, the experience that you have in the lab working with students. What is it that Dr. Tolbert does outside of Case Western Reserve University? What are some things that are important to you outside of this institution, this great institution that we are a part of? What are some things that are important to you outside of this?
Well, obviously, family and good friends are very important, and I can't understate that. One of the things that I've enjoyed most about being at Case is to have colleagues who are also friends. Okay, and not many of them, but they're enough, right? There are enough of them to help maintain some sanity and some balance. But what do I enjoy outside? So I mentioned that I love the outdoors, right? As a kid, I spent a lot of time outdoors. And so to me, the best things about Ohio, Northeast Ohio, are the metro parks. So I get out and I hike, I bike, I kayak, and I like to play golf. And so you can do all of those things in the metro parks, and that's been real enjoyable.
Thank you. And Dr. Tolbert, I want to thank you. I want to thank the African American Alumni Association, the Office of Inclusion and Diversity and Equal Opportunity, and also the African American Studies minor for just this opportunity to highlight some of our great faculty, great administrators, and great work that is being done at Case Western Reserve University. And so we thank you for joining our profile of inclusive excellence, and look for the date in January. I can't remember off the top of my head what date, but Vincent may have that for the January date, but we will be continuing the conversation with Dr. Adrian Fletcher. And so again, Dr. Tolbert, thank you for taking time out of your day and providing such valuable information, especially around the science, because I know I am a liberal arts humanities person. And so in that, I half the time have no idea what you're talking about, or the students that I work with are talking about. So I thank you for your information, and I am going to turn things back over to Vincent, and everyone have a great evening.
Thank you. And I'd like to thank our audience, our wonderful speaker, Dr. Tolbert, and all of you who we know are also, besides on here, we also friends. That was one of the fastest hours I've ever seen. I think it was a 40-minute hour. He was so insightful. And I also truly appreciate your comments about mentoring, because on way, shape, or form, all of us have had some mentor in some way, shape, or form in our life. And sometimes you cannot put a price on how valuable it is just to have one person to be a mentor in your life. I'd like to thank our president, Ms. Hughes, for asking me to do this. And I'd also like to thank all of those who are staying safe at this time too. So have a great day, a great holiday.